All right, guys, and we're back. This is key features of graphs, the second part. So I started off last time, and when I did that, I used this as an example. I went kind of quickly through this, but I did touch on everything I needed to touch on. I am going to do another example here in a second. But just as a quick reminder here, just to kind of go through it, given any function, this function is talking about the distance a roller coaster travels and then how high it is above the ground based on that distance. So right here at 250 feet, I can see that the roller coaster is at about 110 feet up in the air. So I can just follow this and choose different heights for different distances, and that's all well and good. I did want to point out that there's an absolute maximum height, that's the absolute max, and there's an absolute minimum height, in this case at 10. Now, there happen to be two of them, but this is the same height, so I would only say there's only one absolute minimum. Now, if I go through, though, there's an up and then a down, and then an up and then a down. And down here, there's a down and then an up. So when it transfers or when it changes directions like that, we get a relative. And if it's at the peak, it's a relative maximum, like here and here. And if it's down at the bottom, it's a relative minimum. These are just names. We know that the x-axis talks about the independent variable. The y-axis talks about the dependent variable. Here's another example. I want to make sure that we can kind of run through this, make sure we can figure it out. So here's another one. It's talking about bathwater depth. So how deep the water is when you start running the water. All right, and then there are some questions below. I want to make sure we answer those questions, right? So for number 25, it says, what are the independent and dependent variables? Well, the independent is this right here. It's the x-axis. It's the number of minutes since the bath began. And then the dependent is dependent on that. That's the y. All right. Number 26 says, use set notation to write the domain and range of the function. I'm really just asking, so I'll just use this over here. So number 26, the domain and the range. I know the domain, since this is a continuous function, will look like that. And I know the range will look like that. For the domain, what's the smallest value? It's 0. Remember, going left to right. It's 0. And since there is no indication that we do not include it, we must include it. What's the upper range, the upper amount of the domain? Well, it looks like it goes all the way over to 12. And again, since there is no open circle, I can only assume that we should include it. Now for the range, same idea. How low does this thing absolutely go on the y-axis? Well, the lowest is 0, and it must be included. Again, there's no open circle. And what's the lowest value? The highest value. It goes up to 8. And again, it should be included. That's 26. Is this function discrete or continuous? Looking at number 27 now. I've already mentioned that it's continuous because there are no breaks in here. Minutes can continue. It's not really countable. You can always break it down. What is the y-intercept, and what's the meaning of the y-intercept? The y-intercept is where this function crosses the y-axis. This is where it crosses the y-axis. The y-intercept for number 28, the y-intercept is 0. Now we can express that as a point that is 0, 0 if we wanted to. It crosses the y-axis at y equals 0. What does that mean? Well, at 0, this point right here, that's a 0 minutes and that's a 0 depth. That's just the amount of water when you first started. So it means it's the amount when you first started running the water. Right? And in this case, it's 0 inches of water. All right, let's take a look at 29. Trying to make sure I get this done in 5 minutes here. Identify any relative maximums or minimums of the function. Any relative maximums or the minimums of the function. Relative means, are there any that kind of go up and then change? Well, there is a maximum here and a maximum here. There are no relative minimums. So I would say there is a relative max it happens at x equals 3 and x equals 10, but the relative max is 8.